marketing as a growth engine, and the reason why we're talking about that today, because I believe 9 out of 10 times marketing isn't a growth engine. It's a cost center. It's a group of people that just do shit in the office every single day. They get a lot of money that they spend. They have no clue what it does to the business. Every now and then you see some Times Square takeover that rest of the company talks about. I don't know why the hell they did that. They really don't understand the business, hence they don't really move the business. They think they're customer obsessed, but they're really obsessed by channel because most marketing organizations are organized by channel. You hire by channel, you partner by channel, you incentivize by channel. So it's all messed up, right? But as marketers, of course, we don't think like that because the only reason why we work and we want to do work is to impact human life, is to impact the business and impact the world. The reality may not be quite exactly like that, and that's why we wanted to chat today. But before we go any further, I usually like to share my background a little bit, and David kind of shared that, so you took the sizzle away a little bit. But I wanted to give you guys one last chance to get out and have coffee and have a pre-lunch because you're about to spend the next 40 minutes with an engineer trying to teach all of you top marketers in the world how the hell to market and why the marketing doesn't work. So if that's okay, this is what I grew up with. This is a Turbo C++ compiler, and when I was in college, if you did not have the screen on your computer, you were not the cool kid on the block. But that's what I did. And my journey, like you heard, started as a pure engineer in a company called Sapient, part of Publicis. Somewhere in mid-2000s, got into developing ad tech and marketing tech platforms. That is how I got into the world of marketing. And somewhere now, for good or bad reasons, for Freshly, but I'm here as a chief marketing officer. And needless to say that the world's dramatically changed for all of us, and people are flying all over the place. And I have this brief story that I share, which is a reality. Is I have 2 girls, 9 and 5, and my younger one around a year and a half back, when we bought our first Alexa in the house, was walking around on day 2 and suddenly ended up ordering a bunch of books. And thankfully, Amazon has good notifications, and also she wasn't really thinking about cars, so my wife caught it just in time. But that taught me something very, very deep, which is up until a few years back, which is 18, 24 months back, we used to talk about being a mobile-first environment where everything else was friction, and mobile was the channel that was going to remove all friction. And suddenly now in the world of voice-activated actions and commands, now mobile's become a friction, which as marketers kind of shows you the pace at which the world is changing. And even more importantly, the pace at which consumer behavior is evolving, the pace at which they are adopting technology. And hence, we are living in an absolutely consumer-led and consumer-controlled world where the bar for marketers is extremely, extremely high. But has marketing evolved in response to that consumer behavior? Or are we still living in that world of Mad Men, with the Midas touch, where marketing was all about the most creative ad, what made you laugh, and awards? I think it is. Up until I read that, and I don't know how many of you are aware, but around 2 years back or so, Coke made this big change. And Coke, alongside P&G, is perhaps one of the biggest media spenders in the world. And when they made this decision, and whether this was real or just smoke and mirrors, I don't know. But when I read that article, it really made me realize that it's starting to change. Shift is starting to happen. Marketing, people don't want marketing to be just fluff. And if you go back to 2007, when Facebook was still in its infancy, one of the things that Mark Zuckerberg did was hire this guy. His name is Chamath, and many of you may already know him. But his responsibility at Facebook back then, when they were still struggling to be the first ever social platform to break the 100 million user base mark, that was a thing back then, he was asked to create a whole new team called Growth. And it doesn't matter what anybody else did, his charge and mission was just bring as many people as possible from wherever possible and bring them to Facebook, the Facebook platform, and keep them there and keep bringing them back one more time and one more time. And he did a fantastic job. They call him the architect to get Facebook to 500 million users, did some wonderful things for them. But there's something underneath that I believe that whole action also created, What that created was that everybody else in the organization, including marketing, can continue to do shit and they can suck. And we will create these growth teams that will basically be responsible to move the business. And if you are from Silicon Valley or on the West Coast, it is the norm, and it's starting to become norm all over the place as well. Which means if you have a marketing organization, well, you are the guys who are going to build the brand and run the campaigns or design the logo, while either the product guy or these growth guys will really move the business. And in that process, what has marketing ended up doing? Well, we've very joyfully, and we continue to bifurcate marketing itself. So we kind of bastardized marketing to mobile marketing, email marketing, content marketing, without realizing that effectively it's just marketing. It's either good or bad, right? And now, of course, the world's kind of divided into brand marketing or performance marketing, one that builds the logos, the other that buys users, on all these social platforms. But you got to ask yourself a question that, shouldn't marketing be always just about growth? Isn't that why we exist? And what I mean by that is not just growth in the sense of the quantitative and measurable numeric numbers of your top line revenue or your user base or something else, but it is the three intersection points of growing the brand, growing the user base, growing the user value. And growing the brand is what actually builds that underlying love, that culture, when your consumers, when your user base actually feels that they share your mission and share your purpose. And when you have that foundation, you are actually acquiring and growing your user base with far more efficiency and far more effectiveness. And then you apply all that underlying foundation to retain the user by virtue of adding more value every single time. And of course, if you're a startup, how you prioritize those three pillars could be very different, which is fair enough. So if you're a startup just in the early stages of your journey, you're not thinking about spending, X $100,000 or X $1,000 or $1 million to build the brand. Your brand is your core product. And you're just focusing on how the hell do I get the first 100 users, the first 1,000 users? How do I continue to optimize a product to build a product market fit? So ultimately, your brand is your product, and gradually your brand is your user base. And that gets you to the stage of 0 to 1. You get to the product market fit. Now you're cranking up some numbers. But in order for you to get from 1 to N, and let's say change 100 million lives, you cannot do that, with pure power of mechanical performance marketing or mechanical growth. You need the soul in your brand. Hence, it doesn't matter at what point you adopt that, but ultimately, ultimate growth for any business is at the intersection of brand, user base, and user value. So why is it that it's not happening? And if it's happening for you guys, that's brilliant. I can tell you you're one of the 5% brands out there that are killing it. And keep doing it if you are. But I feel that fundamentally the reason why that doesn't happen is because all of us as marketers, we confuse marketing's outcomes from its outputs. We are too focused on outcomes. We're too focused on doing things, too focused on doing campaigns, whereas we're not focused on the outcomes of marketing and holding ourselves accountable for those outcomes. So what are these outcomes? So let's take this very simple example of our total addressable market, whatever that may be for your respective business. And if you position that in these concentric circles and you plant people in these circles, the first step is you identify who are the users and the people and consumers that you actually do not have the right to win because your product isn't really solving the problem for these folks. So you do that. Step 2 is you identify a set of users that you believe you have the right to win because you believe there's a very strong product market fit here, but they have no clue who you are, what your brand is, what your product is, what problems are you really going to solve for them. So the first purpose of marketing is create that demand. Create that demand not with a functional offer, but by education, by awareness, by understanding their needs and their barriers, and creating that pipe, softening the ground. Once you've done that, hopefully through the power of your brand and storytelling, then you come in and you bring all your science and all your access and all your reach through performance marketing and organic loops and referrals programs and X, Y, and Z to capture that demand, but capture that demand in the most efficient and the most effective way. So that's the second purpose of marketing. And then once you've done that, if you've been fortunate enough to do that, then your third purpose of marketing, which is the tallest mountain to climb for any business, is to retain that demand, whichever way you can. Bring them back one more time and one more time. So those three are fundamentally, the core purposes of marketing But then these three pillars or these three purposes do not start and end. They're not dependent on when the next Christmas campaign is going to run, because that's now not how the mom shops when she's looking to buy the next pack of diapers. She's shopping at 10:30 p.m. and the kid's gone off to sleep on a phone. She's not waiting for that campaign. Hence, this has to become an always-on rhythm. Marketing and marketers and brands have to become always-on engines. So all that is great talk, great points, but how the hell do we do it? So I'm going to share 5 core principles that we are applying at Freshly that I've learned, through my error-prone career with all the screw-ups that I've had and now trying to execute these at Freshly. So the first one is very clearly articulating and defining the purpose and mission for marketing within your organization. And what I mean by that is, one, you define clear KPIs across all the 3 outcomes: growing the brand, growing the user base, growing the user value. In other words, creating demand, capturing demand, and retaining that demand. And you create this conundrum of all the muscle that you need to build, all the different capabilities, but ultimately identifying that you need to hold yourself accountable. Every single player in your organization has to hold marketing accountable to these 3 core outcomes. And we'll talk about how you identify KPIs for each one of these. But that's the first and foremost principle. 2 is you do this thing in the best possible way. This is what I've done. You hire incredible people who are much, much better than you are, because then your job becomes easier because you can stay at home. So this is what I've done. Hired some incredible leaders, and I can come here, have coffee, and then just talk. Still get paid. And third is, which is something very, very, I'm assuming, unusual about marketing, is quantify and define what the hell you're going to do, not in the next 1 year, not in terms of campaigns, but in terms of actual impact. And this is something that marketers can learn from product and engineering, that have to be very focused, that are doing sprints and scrums every single day. So identify and define those OKRs, which are objectives and key results. And the key results are not just fluffy key results. Create passion and love for your brand. No, that's not a key result. By how much, for whom, to deliver what outcome. Make that very clear and share that across your organization so you can be held accountable for that impact. So that anytime you're spending any amount of dollar on media, you know what do you expect from that media to come back to the business. Once you've done that, then you start to build and start to put all the pieces together, all the machinery that we saw underneath. All those pieces right there. And that is where companies like mParticle or other capabilities play a massive role. How many of you have actually been through a scenario where you guys have spent, or your companies have spent, millions of dollars doing segmentation, doing consumer research, call and quant research? And how many of you have actually seen that being applied to every single media buying process, or being applied by your product team to customize the experience based on segment A versus segment B? I've seen that maybe 3 out of 10 times, which means the pieces aren't wired. The pieces exist in isolation, but you have all the pieces of that car, but very few people actually have that car assembled. But the consumer is not looking for a tire or a chassis or an axle. The consumer is looking for the assembled car, because the problem they're trying to solve is not to sit on the tire. The problem they're trying to solve is, I want to go from place A to place B in the fastest and the safest possible way. So that's the second principle. And you need to think about how that machinery for your own organization comes together. Skip that. Third is, now you define success. But not success in terms of how many campaigns I'm going to run and how much media money I'm going to spend, but success in terms of the impact on the outcomes that you held yourself accountable for. And we all know that marketing is this never-ending journey from non-measurable to measurable. And as new technologies come along, you are now able to measure a lot more. People are talking about multi-touch attribution, offline to online attribution. So there's a lot that can be measured. But ultimately, your mission is to prove the incrementality of marketing, whichever way you do it. But the answer that we all have to try and get is, if I'm spending $100 to do something, it would not have happened in the absence of marketing. That is the challenge that we have if we have to earn that respect and be on that table within an organization together with product, together with technology, engineering, and finance. And marketing and marketers have to challenge themselves to figure this out one way or the other. And it may not be direct correlation, because some of you may say, we are manufacturers, we're not engaging with the consumers directly. Well, come up with proxy KPIs, extrapolate data, make up some shit, but at least say, yes, this is the incremental impact. Because once you have that baseline, you can keep improving it every month, every week, every year. And of course, as marketing itself evolves, from above the line, where you're creating demand to capturing demand, your ability to measure, more quantitatively varies and it expands. And like I said earlier, as more technology comes along, it starts to become more transparent and more measurable and more accountable as well. Now, here's an interesting aspect that I want you to share. Again, as a data and an engineering guy, the world has always been black and white for me. It either works or doesn't work. But in the last few years, one of the things that I've realized through the mistakes that I've made is that life isn't black and white. We all know it, especially if you're married, in a good way. So I feel marketing in so many ways is the same thing. And I feel that's the role that brand plays in amplifying the impact and the performance of performance marketing. What I mean by that is, while we want to measure every single dollar of marketing, that's a new thing. We're all talking about data and being data-driven and not data-dependent. I feel that brands need to be data-inspired. Don't let data be the enemy of creativity. Don't let data be the enemy of emotion and humanity. And apply the same logic to the principles of measurement. You want to measure every single dollar of marketing as long as you do not kill the emotion and cultural connection with your consumer, which means that as long as you're able to measure 80% of your marketing and you use that 80% to accomplish 100% of your business outcome, then you now have the flexibility to spend the 20% in however you want. Spending that on the irrational, serendipitous part of marketing, that should never go away. And that's been one of my biggest lessons learned. Because if you don't do that, and if you focus on measuring every single dollar of marketing, marketing will become very mechanical. We'll all become like a gaming company, where we're throwing a carrot to bring the user. We will not have that emotional and underlying human and cultural connection with our audience. So you almost have to flip that, where you start to focus on measuring every single dollar of that 80% of your spend, or whatever that percentage may be, but give yourself the room to still have the serendipitous part of marketing and never take that away. And of course, within each of those percentages, and as you go through your journey on creating the demand and capturing demand, you identify whatever KPIs you have, and you report on that and you share that, but hold yourself accountable to impact that marketing is having. We'll skip this, but focus on your leading and lagging indicators, all best practices for measurement. The key being that for that 80%, you got to go so deep that there are no questions asked anymore, and that is what gives you the flexibility to now start to focus on building your brand. Fourth is you invest in understanding the why behind the what. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of focus on understanding first-party data. We talk about that every single day. Or any kind of data that shows you what the consumers are doing. One of the biggest requirements of marketing is to understand why are they doing that, the causality behind those behaviors. What is exactly driving that human behavior? If they are coming to your platform, why are they coming? And if they're leaving, why are they leaving? And that, to a great extent, is that user obsession that marketing has to lead within an organization. The challenge, of course, is because the entire ecosystem is extremely fragmented and focused on channel, your understanding of user is extremely broken, simply because the data is extremely broken, and it's in multiple different places. So how you understand the consumer journey, the consumer behavior, is isolated to those channels. Whereas, other than the marketers, if you really think about how consumers behave in shop, they don't think channels, they just think experiences. And that's the opportunity that marketers have to synthesize that data, only because they can have a true 360 or holistic understanding of the user and understand the why behind that what, why behind every single thing they are doing and not doing. I'm just running through the slides because we're running out of time here. The last principle is, how do you focus on transforming your marketing engine into an always-on machinery and not just start and stop campaigns. Because that's not how the mom shops today. That is not how we think, as consumers every single day of our life. And here's a great analogy that in the Silicon Valley, for example, they used to call it the product value of death, which is if you're on a product team and you're struggling with some numbers and you're trying to drive growth, what do? You launch a product feature. You create a lot of excitement. You have a lot of users who come through. And once a feature kind of becomes old, the users churn and leave. What do you do again? You launch another feature, and so on. So it kind of creates a product value of death. By the end of this entire process, your product has effectively become unusable because it's got so many features. What does marketing do? Well, we have our own version of our value of death. And what do? We launch a campaign. When that effect gets over, people leave. What do we do again? We launch the spring campaign. And one more, and one more, and one more. And through this entire process, we're just talking at the consumer, right? That whole process has to change very quickly, where we need to use data and science to fundamentally understand and build this ability to understand what the consumer needs even before she knows she needs it. That's the ability that marketing needs. That's the capability that we need to establish and then communicate with her so that we are adding value and not interrupting her life, not interrupting her journey. And that's a lot of work. But that is why marketing isn't easy. It's complex, not complicated, but it's difficult. And it's okay to talk about it like that so we have some job security as well. The last point being that marketing is no longer about perfection, right? There is nothing for sure. You can spend $10 million on doing all kinds of research and focus group, ask users what they do, or what they like and what they don't like. You can spend X many hours and days with your creative leads and your creative and design team to come up with the best creative ideas. But you'll never be sure whether something like that is going to work with what type of audience, on what channel, what time of day. So the only lever marketing has now that they absolutely can be sure about is the art and science of experimentation. And the impact of marketing in many ways will be determined by the rate of iteration of your experiments. How many failures have you had in that effort to engage with that consumer? Because unless you do that, you're going to spend way more time to come up with ideas that effectively have no impact on your consumer base. So once you have all those pieces together and you figured out the individual building blocks of your engine of your car, and now you have this car being assembled, then you can start to focus on those three wheels in an always-on way every single day to grow the brand, grow the user base, and grow the user value. And the way we've orchestrated this at Freshly is we now have cross-functional pods focusing on those three wheels while we have capability teams working on the underlying machinery. And each one of those cross-functional pods have very clearly articulated and defined OKRs. Whether they will hit those or miss those, I don't know. Only time will tell. But at the very least, we know where they're headed. How do they connect with the OKRs and plans that the product team has? And we know exactly what we want to hold them accountable for and whether that meets or doesn't meet our targets and milestones. So there's a lot more later on, but we're going to stop here and see if there are any questions. That's it. Actually, I do have a thank you slide at the end. Maybe I can go there. Oh. No, it's gone. Can't find it. Keynote. Anyways.
What do you think's been your biggest difference and change between a digital product like Spotify and Freshly from a marketing standpoint? Like, how do you address something that's so service-driven versus something that's so product-driven?
So that's Erin, we worked together. But she didn't tell me she was going to ask the question. She absolutely did not tell me the question beforehand. But she's being nice because nobody asked the question. So if you guys didn't hear, Erin asked, so what's the difference between my experience at Spotify, which is obviously one of the most iconic brands that we've all we all access hopefully every single day. A digital business like that, and Freshly, which is a vertically integrated D2C platform, a wellness platform that fundamentally makes eating healthy absolutely easy. In my mind, actually, there is no difference, because I don't think when the consumers shop and the consumer is making choices, she's really thinking online or offline. Does she really think touch point A, touch point B, channel A, channel B? I think we all think like that because our jobs are like that. But I think the consumer mindset is absolutely converged, right? For them, they are living in a natively digital world. They don't see analog versus digital, and that's how they shop, that's how they think, that's how they breathe. And I feel that even at Freshly, we don't think about what is analog versus what is online. We look at data to connect and synergize our experiences on online and offline as an organization. And the goal is that regardless of where you are touching that consumer, that your goal and mission is how do you elevate that experience at every subsequent touch point that the consumer has. Whether they come and engage with you in an offline environment or a supply chain which is delivering their meals and food every single week, or they're coming to our online platform, our app, or our web properties to engage with us. The bottom line is how do you leverage data to connect that fragmented ecosystem and hope to have a very connected, seamless, and frictionless experience back to them every single time they come back. So that was a cue for somebody to ask that question. Thank you.
Just curious, I think you may have addressed this, but I'm not sure. One of your outcomes, or what's missing from your outcomes, is revenue attribution. So is that the responsibility of product in your point of view? That's where your job ends?
That's a great question. I can spend one full day answering that. It's a great question because I think it's a very complicated answer where revenue responsibility sits in so many different places. But in this model, I think revenue responsibility is underneath each one of these three cycles: growing the user base, growing the user value, and growing the brand. I directly correlate the impact and uplift movement on all of these three to revenue. For example, I'm assuming when I say growing the user base, your focus is on growing your monthly active users, or it could be growing your subscriber base, which fundamentally is impacting your top line growth. Is it impacting the efficiency at which you're acquiring the users, so your CAC? It may be impacting your LTV, which shows not only the cost and the efficiency at which you acquire, but also the effectiveness of who you're acquiring, the quality of the user, and how long you're retaining them, and so on. So the revenue impact is underneath all of these outcomes. Thank you.